name is Nicolas and I work in computer science and physics and applied to neuroscience. So the focus is going to be about free will and mental health because I'm going to propose that the belief in mental health, that the belief in free will is an essential part of mental health. Does that make sense? Okay. So you're still here with me, right?
Yeah, we're still here. I'm still hearing you. I don't know about everyone else. But I turned my microphone off, so I'm a little bit slow answering your question.
All right. No. I'm just because so that I want to make sure that you don't go away because that's okay. So I wanted to make a brief question that the reason why I'm not going to talk about the possibility of free will being compatible with physics, it's two reasons. The first reason is that it seemed in the program that other people were going to talk about it, and the other issue was that I've done in previous work, I've proposed a compatibilistic model of free will. And so I wanted to say that in my perspective, you don't need to propose free will outside of physics for physics to be compatible with free will. The randomness, the existence of randomness, the existence of a partial influence of the actualization in the advancement of the world, the fact that our bodies participate in the action of decision, that is enough to defend or propose a philosophically valid free will. So I disagree with Nicolas Jensen comment that that it is a magical thought to say that we influence what gets actualized. Actually, my proposal is that how could it be otherwise? Because the act of actualization is connected with us and with the thing being actualized. So I disagree with that, and I think that we can obtain free will from physics rather than to postulate free will and consciousness away from physics. So I, like Antonio Damasio, and I work with him and Dennett, the other people that I've also talked with, I'm a strong believer that both consciousness and free will are completely compatible with the known laws of the universe. But that is not what I'm going to talk about in this talk. What I'm talking about is the issue of what constitutes a healthy mind, what constitutes mental health. So there is often a bunch of circular questions about mental health, but they can be resumed in the following. The definition of mental health, both in psychology and in psychiatry, is very associated with compatibility with the social environment. But that is in itself a self-defining element because it assumes that the society is mentally healthy, and that is not necessarily true. So how can you define, how can you try, or how can you attempt to objectively define mental health? And so what I'm going to propose is that we will try to look at mental health using the data we have from brain imaging, from neuroscience, and then we're going to look at statistics of world behavior, and then we're going to try to propose a kind of a formal perspective of what constitutes mental health. Are you following me?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right. So now, okay. Now, okay. So how can you define the steps for objective mental health definition? First, because thoughts are generally defined as needing to be rational, we will compare mental processes with mathematical logical deduction, but we will not be limited to mathematical logical deductions. Psychology is a standard tool in assessing mental health. So we will build a relation between the narrative-based approach to psychology and mathematical logical deduction. This follows very much the lines of Chatton's work. I'm a big fan of Chatton's work, so a lot of it follows the line of Chatton. For there to be a relation between human decision-making and mental health, actual individual decision-making needs to occur. This implies that mathematical logical deduction needs to allow for the inclusion of the concept of self, of an individual, and that self needs to have alternative forms of decision available, and the self must consider all those alternatives to be attainable. So we must have a consciousness that perceives free will as being a possibility. Because self is both a result and the source of agency, it is therefore a loop. This loop might be focused on the individual organism, could include other people, the entire planet, and even the entire universe. Conceptually, it could include. So I'm not saying that our consciousness permeates the universe. I'm saying that our self-consciousness can have an imagery representation, a mental imagery representation of the entire universe. For alternatives to be attainable and for a rational process to believe in such attainability, some type of good enough free will must be allowed both in the physical universe and in the mathematical logical deduction. We attain both goals by using previously developed concepts of Newtonian axiomatic systems and Darwinian axiomatic systems, which are both examples of what mathematical logical deduction systems can be. A Newtonian axiomatic system uses axioms that are consistent. And a Darwinian axiomatic system uses axioms that are complete but not consistent. So you can choose the Newtonian perspective of consistent, not complete axioms, or the Darwinian perspective of complete but not consistent axioms, so that you can fulfill Gödel's incompleteness theorems, or better, even Chatton's information-based perspective of Gödel's incompleteness theorems. So for me, the brain is a thermodynamic bath of states, and so the dynamics are Newtonian, and you basically, but you have an entropic component, but it's basically a thermodynamic systems, and so mental health is acting freely using compatible resources, alternatives, and outcomes. It is a balance between self-action and the universe's unavoidable rules. So, we talked before about the illusion of conscious will. And so what I'm talking about here, what we have in our consciousness is not a free will. It's a free will perception. That is, the free will as we perceive it through our conscious system, through our consciousness. So I'm proposing that free will perception exists and that it exists in the brain, but the fact that free will exists in a philosophically more global scale is a different issue, and to solve the issue of free will in the large conceptual system, you need physics. But for free will perception, you just need psychology, neuroscience, brain imaging, and things like that. So apparent freedom, which is what free will perception is okay. It is satisfactory if self-action exists. And the self-action means that the action that I take can be seen or can be perceived and can be proved to belong to me. And for that, you just need physics. Okay, so in resume, feelings which constitute are equivalent to resources plus alternatives plus outcomes, and it is possible to establish a parallel between a logical mathematical system and the psychology narrative. So can you see well the table?
Yes, I can see, yes, quite well.
Okay, so you can see on the right column is psychology's narrative. So that's a system that is used in psychology, which is the different paths of a narrative, how you create a self-narrative or how you create a narrative to other people. So you have a setting, initiating event, and so forth. And next is how you define axiomatic systems. So I'm using Chatton's definition of axiomatic systems that is quite general. The distinction that I propose in a different paper and a different article is that when you're proposing the axioms, you can either choose to be consistent or complete. For those who do not remember or do not know, a system of axioms is consistent if you cannot prove something and it's contrary. That means it's consistent. And it's complete if all the statements on a system can be obtained from the axioms. So if a system is complete but not consistent, it means that sometimes the things obtained in the axiomatic system contradict themselves, and then you need to extinguish some of them, and that's when you get Darwinism. So I'm saying that there are actually two forms of determinism. There is Newtonian determinism and there's Darwinian determinism. And either you study psychology or mathematics or other field, you always have a choice between a Newtonian perspective of determinism or a Darwinian perspective of determinism. In Newtonian determinism, the source of the causation is the past. In Darwinian determinism, the only causation that exists is the survival in the future. So there is not so much a past causation, there is a causation that will reveal itself in the future by the interaction with the environment. So this is some of the work we have done, and the work we've done, this is very known. It's about brain imaging and how what is happening in the brain is directly associated with what is happening in the heart. And then also there are other work that shows that what is happening in the heart is also related to what is happening in the stomach. And our brain has a very strong capacity to survive injuries and lesions and still work well. And then you can define the functional connectivity between areas, and this can perceive a certain of a default mode of behavior, which is the resting state of the brain, and a kind of a calm state of the brain. Now it used to be three-axis neuroepistemology, so I forgot the R. And the reason why this is so relevant is that this is a work not done by me, but I use this in my work. And this is the way that a mapping of words was made in the brain. And this is associated with three major axes. And I'm going to propose that those three major axes are essential for mental health. The one axis is called PC1, which is all axes start from the locational, visual, / tactile perspective, so very intrinsic to self-awareness. And then you can go into a direction of emotional or communal perspectives, and that goes in the dorsal ventral. For the non-anatomists here, dorsal ventral means up down in the head. Then you see the axis 2, which goes from locational, visual, tactile to the social, professional, and the X goes from center to left, or from center to right. And then the PC3, which goes from the locational, visual, tactile into the mental abstract, and that goes from the back of the head into the forward of the head. So there's an actual axis in the brain, and I'm going to propose this axis associated, and so all the other things like the demeanor of the person, the symbolic representation, the choice between Kant-like axioms or Hume-like axioms in what amounts to what constitutes a rational action. So all this can be mapped, and these can be associated to different stages of evolution of biology, of Darwinism. So basically, when we're talking about the axis of our body, we are also talking about the axis of our brain, and we also talking about the axis of what we do in the environment, which is eating, choosing, and hunting. And choosing is the issue, because choosing is about free will. So the perception of free will is one of the three major axes of mental health. And it's associated with mood, which is one of the key aspects of psychiatric disorders. Are we following me until now? Yes?
Yes, Nicolas. Just takes 1 second to turn on my microphone to confirm.
Okay.
Yeah, at least I am doing quite well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
you. And so, though it is possible using those axes to make a map of the feelings, of the emotions, and so the conclusion, and other psychologists, especially in the line of positive psychology, have proposed the same. The only true feelings are the positive feelings of enthusiasm, happiness, pride, elevation, and wonder. The negative feelings relate to each of the three axes, and they are associated with how much we are detaching from our state of freedom. But to understand, from our state of wellness, our state of balance. And those three axes, one of them is about freedom. So although psychology had proposed the eros axis and the thanatos axis, which are associated to eating and hunting, we have proposed a third axis, which is now second, but is associated with the group one. Groups are the ordering made by Damasio, and the evolution stages are the stages of evolution that are standard in biology, that have to do with appearances of different aspects like eating, choosing, and hunting, which appear in different stages of biological evolution, and that's how they also be mapped to different steps in different parts of the organism. But the thing is that the issue of free will is essential, because it's about the Tyche axis. Tyche is the Greek goddess of randomness, and so we thought very appropriate to give it this name, since the others also have Greek gods associated with them, so we also choose that one. And the wellness, we chose logos, which is a term that has a strong history in philosophy. It also has a religious component, but the history in philosophy is even longer than the religious component. And so the axis of free will have associated to attachment, sadness, bipolarity, envy, and jealousy. And so have to do with, if you have reduction of freedom, then you start having this. Then you start having these issues. And now a brief homage to my favorite playwright, which is Shakespeare, which basically he had a very good structure of drama. And there's a very good book written about the Shakespeare equation, which is that he has three archetypes, which is for the male is Adonis, Collatine, and Tarquin, and for the female is Venus, Lucrece, and Persephone, which can be identified with Freud's identity types. This is just to say that Shakespeare was a genius and is my favorite author. Now, I'm not going to detail about Brownian versus Darwinian dynamics, because I've already explained them, and so there's no point on discussing it, but here is a more general analysis. So about the neuroepistemological assessment, the outcome of this analysis is a neuroepistemological assessment of interrelation between mental health, ethics, and religion. And religion is very much about choice, in the sense that most religious beliefs, except for Calvinism, which is one of the rare exceptions, are very to do with the act of choosing the right option, choosing the right form of action, as is ethics. And so I'm proposing that mental health is also strongly associated with free will. So the non-existence of free will, or the belief on the non-existence of free will, has been indicated by several psychologists and psychiatrists to be very negative to the people having this lack of belief in free will, because of the feelings of impotence and powerlessness that it generates. Because humans perceive themselves in the narrative perspective and are aware that death is inevitable, the future outcome waiting relevant for neural decision making becomes strongly disturbed by the awareness of death, which is using more technical terms to say the same thing I just said. And the religion in most communities is the mechanism by which the death awareness is dissipated so that the neuronal decision making can work properly despite of the awareness of death. Thus, religions and its corresponding ethics suggestions are a key aspect of the well-functioning neuronal decision-making process, and hence a key aspect of mental health. Now, I realize that every human being, so what I'm claiming is that every human being that is mentally healthy is religious. But that does not mean that he needs or she needs to belong to an organized religion, believe in God, or assume a unique set of rules governing what is ethic. What it means is that ethics to work must be death compatible, and this requires some type of transcendence. Shakespeare's intuition that relationships must include the transcendence aspect that transcends the conditioned world we can act upon is correct. So I'm going to repeat this phrase. Are you with me still?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Shakespeare intuition that relationships must include the transcendence aspect that transcends the conditioned world we can act upon is correct. It is thus essential for bioethics, for ethics, for morality in general, to take in consideration the person's requirement that each life they know is treated with the correct technique applied to the condition and the correct respect towards the transcendent. And each person has its own definition of transcendence. For some, they can axiomatize the transcendence of free will or the transcendence of consciousness. But that is not a scientific perspective. That is not a requirement of philosophy. That is an act of belief that people have put as a form of establishing their own mental health. There's a lot of people that have helped me. Eduardo Souza gave me a lot of support for all this work, also grants like Fundação for Science and Technology. And also, I would like to thank the centers where I participate and Vitor Alves, which has been very kind. And now, hopefully, I can go back and you can see me. Are you seeing me now?
Yes, I can see you, of course.
Okay, I know it's not a great sight to see. I know, but it's the face I have. So sorry about that.
No, we are sorry too.
So
okay.
So that's the presentation. It was not long because I wanted a lot of time to interaction, but I think I've explained the major part of it, and we can always go back into the slides.
Yes, sure. Okay, so go ahead with questions to Dr. Nicolas Lori. Nobody there? Well, well, anyway, well, they will show up here somewhere. My assistant is coming to help me to see. Hello?
Hi, Laurie. I like that
Hi.
talk. It's a very interesting perspective that I've not really given much attention to, but it's an impressive way of looking at it. But I don't have any questions. It was very clear.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I guess my talk was extremely clear. Was there some part of the slides that you did not understand or did not agree or think that it could have been made better? I guess I'm getting a 20.
Matt, we're not hearing you. We're seeing your lips move, Matt, but we're not hearing you.
Hi, Matt. I cannot hear you, Matt.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay,
oh, now I hear you. Now I hear you.
I will send you scan of my brain so you will figure out what's going on there. Well, anyway.
Actually, the images of the axis, it's actually very funny how they did it. So since I have a little of time, people not asking questions, I can explain it. This is actually work done in the United States. And the thing is that they did the following. There's a work about the 100 words more commonly used in English. So what they did is that they put, speeches. They put people listening to the speeches, and the people were just listening to the speeches, and then they tried to see how their brain activity, and brain activity measures the consumption of energy in specific parts of the brain, usually the cortex, and so they looked at the cortex, and they looked at what regions of the brain were correlating with the occurrence of certain words. Okay, and so they then mapped those words into the brain, and then they found that similar words, specific types of words, were clustering in different regions, and that's how they got the PC1, PC2, and PC3 axis, which PC just means principal component. So it's an axis obtained by principal component analysis. And so that's how they define the anatomical axis coming. Then there's also a work by Van Vedeen at Harvard. He's a friend and colleague of mine. And even if you don't know his work, if you like the band Muse, do you know the band Muse?
No.
It's a rock band called Muse, and they have an album called The Third Law, and the cover of that album was made by my friend. So if you see what kind of work he does, it's in the cover of that album. So what he does is trajectography. So he represents trajectories of the fibers connecting the human brain, and he also obtained the 3-axis system in the human brain. So there's a kind of like a 3-axis system. And also, evolutionarily speaking, other people have developed axis system, which are basically to do with the fact that the world is 3-dimensional, and that also that our evolution from being plants that are just waiting for some food to get there, like trees still do with the sun, they're just standing there, to things, to plants that actually can move slightly to better nutrients, to then actually be able to catch other animals. And that's the development of time, this concept of the development of time. So all these 3 axes are happening in our bodies, and that's how they can be related. And Antonio Damasio also talks about how our feelings often have to do with space. For instance, when we're proud, and I'm proud right now because you understood my talk, so I'm very proud. So my shoulders get straightened, my column gets up, my face gets more straight. And so there's an interrelation between what we do and our interaction with the universe. So when people ask about the idea that we influence what gets actualized through an experiment, it says, how can it be otherwise? Of course, we influence what gets actualized, and we get influenced by what gets actualized, because we are living in this world. It's like Laplace's demons. He's living in the world. He's interacting with it. He's there. And we are in this universe. And so I don't want to take too much of the time. You are very kind on listening to me. And thank you very much for the praises. And thank you very much for saying it was understandable. So if you have no questions, I'm done.
Oh, sure, there's more questions. I can see everybody ready to ask. I kind of like the thinking that you are trying or attempting to combine this classical physics with Darwinian thinking. Although I can see and imagine a great number of issues and questions there, but I think that's that is interesting way to go, in the sense that physicists, they tend to forget that at the end there is a experiment, and at the end there's a real world which is around us. And sure, we can make all those complicated and sophisticated theories and calculations and the computers of completely giant size, but still there's no science in that. I mean, there's no predictive power of doing something and then arriving at certain conclusion, wrong or correct one, but just making science in the sense of that we can check it out with experiment. Because there's no use of making nice and long and beautiful equations if there is no experimental verification of that. I'm speaking here about something which I would say constructive physics. Mm-hmm. It means, in my thinking, it means that we are trying to not to make things beautiful, but to make them working. It's like engineer is not thinking about how beautiful should be the bridge connecting to going across the river. The engineer is thinking how to make it safe for people and so on. And physicists, they are very funny in many ways, telling that, oh, something is beautiful, but for the crowd, for the people, I mean, they do not care about this, how beautiful is a given equation. The point is how this equation is reflecting whatever is around us. So for that reason, attempting to combine classical physics with the Darwinian approach, that you have evolution, you have something which is changing around, which is more real than just equation, just mathematics, then of course this is very, very interesting. And those brain scans, they are indeed very, very interesting. And that's I really appreciate that. In the sense that, I'm sorry.
I wanted to say two small things. One is that there is a theory of physics called quantum Darwinism, which is by Wojciech Zurek, which is basically, which made me start thinking a lot about that. So what he does is that he was trying to study the process of quantum measurements, and he was trying to understand the role of information. So you usually think, well, if you measure a quantum system, it becomes classical, but a lot of people, actually a lot of people also in École Normale Supérieure in France, we're starting to think, okay, what if we measure with 1,000 photons? Well, then it becomes classic. What about 100 photons? Then it becomes classical. What about 10 photons? What about 2 photons? What about 1 photon? Is 1 photon enough? And it's not. And if you don't know, it's not. So if you take a picture with 1 photon, the quantum system remains exactly as quantum as before. So it collapses very little. And so so quantum Darwinism is a theory of physics that was constructed to work for this kind of understanding of the interface between measurement and the classical world. And so there is already a tradition in physics, a line of thinking in physics about joining quantum mechanics and Darwinism. And so what I did, my step was to bring that concept and bring Darwinism back into mathematics and assess the issue of Gödel's incompleteness theorems and the fact that you have to choose between completeness and consistency. And since mathematics usually chooses, using the ZFC axioms, uses consistency, then I say, okay, what would happen to a mathematics that would choose completeness instead of consistency? And then I said, if you have a mathematical system in the universe, so our work was about the Big Bang. So if you had a Big Bang and the axiomatical mathematical system at the beginning of the universe, so I did this work with Alex Plain, how could you assess the dynamics of a system that is complete rather than consistent? And the conclusion is that it must be Darwinian. And the second issue is that in Darwinian systems, biological Darwinism, you cannot predict what will be the next species to become extinct. So future extinctions are unpredictable, and that's the characteristics of Darwinian.
But that is the core of the critics of this thinking, Darwinian thinking, that this is it's not science, it's just something which is out of science, where that you cannot use a scientific method, you cannot predict with whatever accuracy, what will happen in the near future. It's just a guessing game. And this is what most of the physicists will object, in the sense that well, we would like to have we would like to know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yes, we all would like to break Gödel's incompleteness, and fortunately we can't.
But there's a way out of this thinking about this constructive physics. The idea is not new, but it was done in mathematics when people were questioning it. Or was 100 years ago. They were questioning. Yeah, they were questioning many things in mathematics, and that was, in my opinion, at least, making quite a sense and kind of new understanding of the old stuff. And the same with physics. To me, if you cannot calculate something in reasonable time, then just forget it. It's not any use of it, to run a huge computer for days and hours and whatever, and to get at the end the digit 25. That is not constructive, in the sense that if I can see around you see this around yourself, that this world is somehow working, and that's it. It's working. Somehow it's working.
Somehow it's working.
And despite our sophistication, despite of our tools and computers and whatever, we cannot follow, predict, or whatever the most simple stuff which is around us. I just say, returning to the Newtonian physics, that three-body calculations it's difficult. A five-body, it's impossible. You can run a huge computer for hours and days, but it's just five-body approximation. So is that possible, that this world is so complicated? Or is this possible, like some people, they tend to think that the whole world is one computer which does the calculations of the position of all the atoms, galaxies, and everything. So it must be there is some way around, meaning that we could simplify many things and still call it science. Anyway, it's just I'm just talking. It's a late hour, but again, I will read Dr. Gisin papers one more time, and this is why I was asking about those real numbers. The very name is confusing, real, but they're completely out of the space. And
this presentation I made is coming out in a book by Vernon Press, and so I'm one of the chapters in the book. So when the book comes out, I'll be glad to let you know that it came out. I mean, they are printing it right now.
Sure,
so
of course.
so you then can read that chapter, and maybe I can send you the PDF to you, and so that you can, the ones who liked it can say good things, and those who didn't like it can criticize strongly to make it better.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much.